Fox News radio studios in New York City, giving you opinions and facts with a positive approach. It's Brian Kilmeade.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. This is Brian Kilmeade. Happy to be coming to you on a beautiful Monday where we have so much going on today, including the perilous activities over in Thailand as we try to save more and more. The world has really come together with the best and the brightest as well as the bravest to try to get these soccer kids out of this cave. And time, oxygen is slipping away. 5, we can now confirm, have gotten out. And there's 7 more to go, including a 25-year-old coach. So we're watching that. And we do have some exciting things going on tonight. And for the President of the United States, my goodness, one of the issues we're about to explain would have been big. He's got 5. So let's get to the big 3.
Now, with the stories you need to know, it's Brian's Big 3. Number 3.
I'm concerned that instead what we're going to see is a repeat of last month's show where President Trump went to the G7 summit in Canada and put a thumb in the eye of the Prime Minister of Canada and picked fights with our vital allies.
Senator Chris Coons, I always count on to be somewhat level-headed. You're right, it didn't go well at the G7, but you have to point out the G7's role in it not going well. The President of the United States is going to meet with NATO this week, a consequential meeting with 28 allies. Will the President focus on the improved spending and strategy with the world's most successful alliance, or will he spend time talking about dollars and cents, and that sadly only 6 nations have spent 2% of their GDP as mandated by the treaty and the charter? The president, I think, will surprise with a unity message.
Number 2.
I think Secretary Pompeo, I'm going to give him some credit. You know, he's had 3 visits to North Korea. The first 2 to set up the summit were good. But this one, I don't think turned out well.
Governor Richardson's been dealt in, I believe, to the State Department and this mindset in dealing with North Korea. He knows as much as anyone. I really value his opinion on a regular basis, especially yesterday, but this was not a good summit for Mike Pompeo. It was described as gangster-like by the North Korean officials. Mike Pompeo, gangster-like? What are you kidding? We need a timeline and a declaration of denuclearization from Kim Jong-un. His hermit boys are playing games. Rocket Man needs an attitude adjustment. Will Trump give it to him?
Number 1.
I'm getting very close to making a final decision, and I believe this person will do a great job. They're excellent. Everyone, you can't go wrong.
So, Donald Trump leaving his golf club in New Jersey. It's kind of hot to go all the way to Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Talking about his big decision, 9 o'clock tonight. It was done with great drama and great flair when Gorsuch was nominated. What about tonight? We're down to the final 4, and my sense is this will be leak-proof up until maybe 10 minutes before 8:50 Eastern Time. And you know why? I don't think he made up his mind yet. He's meeting right now, I understand, with his officials. At 12 o'clock, they'll evidently come to a conclusion, and then they'll try to keep it quiet. Will they keep it quiet? That's interesting, because I am not sure that there's a bad pick among them. What I think that you should do this time, Mr. President, is go with the guy that actually has the most political savvy, that's more responsible, I think, for your presidency than most give him credit for, and that's Mitch McConnell, who sat on Merrick Garland's nomination and made the election Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, more about the future of the Supreme Court than the future of the presidency. Mitch McConnell told the president the past week that Judges Raymond Kethledge and Thomas Hardiman presented the fewest obvious obstacles to being confirmed. However, read the tea leaves. According to Axios, Senator Orrin Hatch reportedly used female pronouns in a Desert News op-ed referring to the Supreme Court nominee. That would mean Judge Amy Coney Barrett. And guess what? Senator Orrin Hatch is respected by President Trump as much as anyone in the Senate. And, of course, being the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has a lot of pull. In terms of the attack plan, even without a nominee, cut number 2 shows Democrats going off already.
It's an historic decision. It's about more than the next election.
This may be the pull the fire alarm moment that you have been expecting.
The future of America is at stake.
Roe v. Wade is doomed. It is gone because Donald Trump won the election.
I've never seen a president of the United States, in effect, make himself a puppet and choose from a group of right-wing fringe ideologues.
Yeah, Senator Blumenthal's always good for something that makes no sense. Yeah, ideologues. How about expertise like the Federalist Organization, who the president respects, who focuses on judges, their history, and who would be best for the Supreme Court? That's called respect for people that do this. Leonard Leo left the Federalist to help the president with the screening process, said, everybody talking about Roe v. Wade, calm down, cut 8.
Is it fair to say that anyone who made it onto your list is likely to be an opponent of Roe v. Wade?
No. First of all, nobody really knows. We've been talking about this for 36 years, going all the way back to the nomination of Sandra O'Connor. And after that 36-year period, we only have a single individual on the court who has expressly said he would overturn Roe. So I think it's a bit of a scare tactic.
Joining us now, Michael Goodwin, outstanding New York columnist, also Fox News columnist. He joins us now. Listen, Michael, you made a lot of headlines with your column talking about Hillary Clinton possibly planning a 2020 run. But before we do that, talk about 9 o'clock tonight. What do you expect? And is the vitriol at this level, even without a nominee, even surprising you?
Well, good morning, Brian. Vitriol from the left these days is so predictable that it's not even newsworthy anymore. I mean, Richard Blumenthal these people have no credibility to speak seriously about the issue. It is so partisan that you immediately say, next case. As for tonight, look, at first I think that it strikes me as a bit of brilliant stagecraft for the president to do this in prime time on television. It focuses the whole country's attention. Anybody who's interested anyway will have no trouble finding it. And it focuses attention on this person, on the presidency, on Trump's standing. I mean, I think he will perhaps talk about Gorsuch while he nominates this person, say this person follows Gorsuch, which has been a home run, the phrase he used the other day. I think he's tried out some of these lines, and the president tends to go back to the things that he's used already. I don't think we'll find a lot of new language except as it relates to the name of this actual person. Someone told me that yesterday while he was golfing, I mean, he was asking the caddies even, who do you think? So I think this is the way the president works. This is how he does things. And then once he makes the decision, he will ram it through. And your point, Brian, in the intro about Mitch McConnell and the easiest path to confirmation is definitely something the president has to consider, because there will not be time for a second pick before the midterms. So you've got to get it right. You've got to get this person confirmed, meaning you essentially have to unite the Republican Party as well as hopefully bring along a couple of Democrats.
Yeah, here's the thing. I actually believe I'm not the. I don't know where exactly this case is, but it's coming up shortly. All these Republican states led by Texas just joined to try to get DACA, to the executive order by President Obama, this DACA order, try to prove that it's unconstitutional and throw it out. That would put front and center the DACA issue again, immigration before the election. Now, if that does not come to fruition, this is the last vote of any consequences. If you're John Tester, Senator McCaskill, if you're Joe Donnelly, if you're Heidi Heitkamp, how can you or Joe Manchin, you can't possibly tell your Republican constituents, your red state constituents, that you're a moderate and that you're open if you're going to vote against somebody that just is truly a conservative and professional and respected. You can't possibly do that. So you should be able to get those 5 if they want another 6 years.
You would think so, but some of these states are different. The candidates themselves are different. For example, I think Tester in Montana strikes me as a real Montana guy, and I think that's why
he's a farmer.
Yeah, and that's why he was elected in the first place. And as you probably saw, in fact, I think Fox reported this, that last week before the president came to Montana, Tester was running ads touting how many times he's voted with the president. So I think that is one way of counteracting. If you're going to vote against him on this one, you voted against him on tax cuts. Well, I voted for him 85% of the time. I'm not sure what those things add up to, but in fact, it is a way of acknowledging to the Republicans in the state, I'm not anti-Trump. I don't hate Donald Trump. I just disagree with him on a couple of key issues. I think that's one way to run a campaign for maybe one candidate.
Michael, as we go to break, I just want to get your take. I think that the president tends to zig when everyone expects him to zag and vice versa.
Right.
And after the G7 summit, the president doesn't want to acknowledge it yet for a tactical reason, but he has gotten every one of the NATO allies to spend more on defense. They have come up with a cyber defense force focus. They also have come up with a 30-day activation plan, land, sea, and air, to act within 30 days should the Russians move in the east, and we've moved our troops forward. So there is a lot of positives since he took office in NATO. I think he's going to emphasize the positive. Do you think I'm dreaming and it's going to be G7 too, or do you think there might be more of a positive feel to this NATO after this NATO meeting is done?
Look, I think it's up to the other NATO members as well as President Trump. I mean, they are the ones who were so negative at the G7, and they've resisted him on everything, whether it's the Iranian deal, climate control, the Paris Accord, and the spending. And I saw a report the other day, Brian, that kind of made it sound positive. And it turns out that roughly, about half of the NATO members will spend the required 2% of their GDP on defense in 2024. So that's 6 years away. So I think that, yes, they've stepped up their spending, many of them, but there's still a long way to go. And I think this is a fundamental issue. I mean, because NATO is about protecting Europe from Russia. That's why
I hear you, Michael,
that's
but I'm
why
just
it's
saying
there.
Do you want to see, everything you said is correct, but do you want to review it and say, I see improvement, and the 2024 deadline's got to be moved up, but man, this alliance has never been stronger, and it's the most successful ever assembled in modern times, which is all true. So it depends on what you want to emphasize while not sugarcoating.
Yes.
And I sense the president might want to do that going into the Russian summit.
Yes, Brian, but you're right. But I would add one other wrinkle here, which is that I don't know the president's confidence in NATO, where it actually to come to a military maneuver, the cyber and all these things. If Russia made a move, would Merkel, would the Germans really fight? I mean, the Germans haven't fought anywhere. Great Britain has essentially disarmed. It does not have an aircraft carrier with anti-missiles anymore. All these welfare states have looked to America to protect them. Yes, they're coming around now, but are they really militaristic with their military? Are they ready to fight? Would they fight? Would their populations support that? Or would they all just say, no, let's be nice. Gotcha. Let's be nice. If we're nice, they'll be nice to us. That appeasement mentality is what has ruled Europe. Without the United States, there is no NATO. Right. So I remain skeptical.
And you would. It sounds like you want a tougher line. So interesting, Michael Goodwin. Thanks. Stick right there. What I want you to do is come back and expand on why you believe that Hillary Clinton is thinking 2020. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show. It's a busy Monday. We're also following the evacuation, we hope, of more players from that Thailand cave situation. Oxygen running out. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show.
Getting past all the rhetoric. It's Brian Kilmeade.
And prayers are with those boys in Thailand. I hope our hearts and prayers are also with thousands of children, toddlers and infants removed from their parents. They're trapped in a bureaucratic cave too.
Yeah, Dick Durbin has to play politics with Thailand teens stuck in a cave. That is just ridiculous. But we have great news. At least 8, Fox News is now reporting, at least 8 boys have been rescued from the flooded Thailand cave. Rescuers are waging war with water and time. Remember, they pulled out 4 on Sunday, 4 more today. I wonder if they're going to continue. And the coach, of course, is still there, too. With us is Michael Goodwin. Michael, this cave situation, it just gives us a break from what's going on in politics. Does it surprise you that Dick Durbin equates the two?
Yeah, Brian, some people, politicians especially, can't get their head out of politics. They can't see anything else. I think it's one of the things that's wrong with our country right now, frankly. When I used to love Garrison Keillor. I used to love to listen to Perry Home Companion until he just endlessly started making George Bush comments. I mean, it spoiled it for me. You see that all the time. You cannot watch a comedy show. Everything is about Trump. So it's just, of course, when Obama was president, Obama was great. Republicans were stupid. So it's politics all the time, and I think it is a destructive force in our country. Most people in the real world don't pay attention to politics 24 hours a day. It's the political class, though, that has grown. I think that it used to be called the chattering class. Now it's Dan Henninger calls the nighttime comedians, Democrats at night. Myron Magnet calls illegal aliens undocumented Democrats. I mean, all of this is about the cultural forces that are helping to try to reshape politics. But as we see in the elections, it doesn't necessarily carry over.
Right. Let's talk about Hillary Clinton 2020. If she does want to get something going, I think she's going to be alone. I don't think there's any Democrat that really embraces Bill or Hillary Clinton right now. Do you?
I do. Look, I wrote this column, Brian, because I've been getting a number of emails. I'll probably stop getting them now, but from her group called Onward Together, which she signs them all, and I'm sure somebody else writes them, but they are now coming fast and furious. I mean, I've gotten 5 in the last 31 or 32 days, and each of them is very much attuned to the headline of the day. They're often asking for money for the group, or congratulating groups on or candidates who win, or they're talking about the Supreme Court, and they all have the same tone, which is this is from the resistance headquarters, and I believe that she's setting herself up with this group Onward Together, which of course sounds like her campaign from the last time, as another campaign vehicle in waiting, so that she is gathering money, gathering support, putting some of these small groups in her debt by giving them money, by giving them attention. She's doing a lot of speaking among women's groups. She's honored constantly. Of course, we saw her at commencements, and I believe that she is setting the stage so that if no one else emerges from the Democratic field, she is to knock her out. I mean, I think of her as the closest thing to an incumbent. You've got to beat the incumbent before you can be the leader. And so far, who beats her? I mean, imagine her in the primaries running against Andrew Cuomo.
But she never had a fight. The last person who fought her, Obama, destroyed her. He had 2 years' experience.
Yes.
Bernie Sanders and that clown mayor for governor who wanted to play against Singh at Wall Street. She had no shot. And when she matches up with Obama, she loses. And then she matches up with Trump, she gets destroyed.
Yes, but don't forget, you have to beat her. Let's say, can you beat her one-on-one in a primary in a blue state? I think that's the measurement, and I think she would beat them in the blue states.
Michael Goodwin, no one beats you. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
We go inside the Keep Ice Alive moment in just a moment.
Information you want, truth you demand. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show.
We need to rebuild our immigration system from top to bottom, starting by replacing ICE.
Look at ICE. What a group of incompetents. At this point, they're focused more on toddlers than terrorists.
You believe some of this stuff that's been going on in our country as you try to get illegal immigrants, many of which are criminals, out of the country or at least to appear in court? They're blaming the law enforcement arm that was commissioned to do so by President Bush. The INS was his predecessor, and now ICE is being looked at as the bad guys across the country, and now the Democrats are using it as a platform. Some were sober enough to bring it up and say that's a problem, and that's Jay Johnson, former Homeland Security Secretary. His analogy is great. He said during the Vietnam War, people were saying, stop war. They weren't saying abolish the Defense Department. So if you don't like what ICE is doing, you can reform some of the things that are going on, get in there, get your hands dirty, and go over it, hear from them, or you can be political and start chants, abolish ICE, and take your lead from a 28-year-old in New York City who might have maybe a fresh start. She's a socialist from New York City, but now you're letting the Democratic Party be led by a 28-year-old who has not even won an election yet, just a primary. So we have a lot to discuss there, and joining us now to discuss that and so much more is somebody that came forward and talked about his experience working with ICE. Jason Piccolo, not with them now, but speaking out in favor of it, and a whistleblower to a lot of things that were going on the inside. Jason, welcome.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks for having me.
No problem. You're a former ICE supervisor. What's your sense, first off, about the organization and how it's being labeled by many on the left?
It's false. It really is. Now, I brought this up a few times before. ICE is made up of I don't know how many thousands of people, lots of veterans, everybody from every different culture, creed, religion, everything you can imagine. So this is just blatantly false. And they don't even know what they're talking about. They're talking about one specific piece of ICE. They're talking about the immigration part. There's so much more to it.
Okay. For example, why have they been commissioned to do something they weren't supposed to do under President Trump?
No, actually, they're doing exactly what their job is. They're enforcing our immigration laws. Now, look at it this way. There was thousands and thousands of people coming across the border before this, hundreds of thousands. They're still doing the same mission they were before.
What was that mission?
Listen, the ICE mission it's a twofold. You have enforcement and removal operations, which conducts interior enforcement, i.e., doing our immigration laws. And then you have Homeland Security investigations, which does everything concerning transnational crimes. You have smuggling, terrorism investigations, sexual exploitation, child porn, anything you can imagine.
This guy, Michael Pocan, who I talked to on television, Wisconsin congressman, says if his bill that he's sponsoring gets through, it would abolish ICE within 6 months. What would be the ramifications of abolishing ICE within 6 months?
Well, for one, your visa security is going to go out the door. You're going to let anybody in that with the bad intentions into this country. Now, granted, you could say 99.9% of the people coming into the country have great intentions, but what if that 0.1% comes in and they're terrorists? What if our visa security control process picks up on that? You're also going to get rid of smuggling operations. Who does smuggling operations? ICE does. ICE does anything that has to do with the nexus of the border. And a lot of people don't realize that. Anything coming in or going out of this country, i.e., if you're going to send a stinger over to Syria from some bad actor in this country, ICE is going to stop them.
Hey, I'm just wondering, Jason, what is it like? What would it be like if you're in Philadelphia working in an ICE office and you look outside and there's hundreds of people chanting against you and your organization?
It's disheartening. Think about it. I used to, believe it or not, I used to work in Philly office, in that very office. And then I went over and took over the office in Delaware. Now, I still have a lot of friends in that office. It's very disheartening. Now, you have a lot of veterans. You have people from like I said before, every race, religion, color, creed, anything you can imagine working in that office, working to protect our nation. Well, the problem is you have protesters outside protesting the tearing apart of women and children and everything. But the issue is the people they're not coming in through designated ports of entry. They're not coming in a consular office. They're coming in the wrong way.
And my problem is for you guys is that you get local officials in Democratic-run communities or mayor's offices, and they've been told don't cooperate. So you have a local law enforcement official who's not cooperating with you to let you know that somebody is being let out of jail or been given a summons. So you have no way of tracking them. So you have to go put yourself in danger, finding your own leads to find people that were once wrapped up. Correct?
Brian, we had the best, what they call the 287G or Secure Communities program. A lot of people didn't like it because they were picking up, criminals that had like DUIs and stuff like that. But you got to imagine that now they're releasing people that had committed crimes such as murder, sex crimes against kids, domestic abusers. And now the ICE agents have to go to their house, potentially get killed doing their in a line of duty, when they could just as easily go to the prison or go to the jail and go from one secure location to another secure location. So you're not going to be in danger of your life and limb.
So you had 19 ICE agents sign on to say that that ICE has lost its way, essentially. They appeared in the New York Times about 2 weeks ago. Who are they? What do you know?
Hey, Brian, I think that came out I think it was misread, and I think it was kind of a shotgun from the ICE special agents in charge. But I think, in a way, they were looking at it the right way. The optics right now are as ICE is bad. So let's say you're that ICE Homeland Security agent, and you're out there doing a smuggling arms investigation. And you go out and you tell someone you're with ICE. You go to a factory that's doing, guns and stuff like that, and you say, hey, I'm with ICE. And they're like, oh, my gosh, you guys are with immigration. No, the problem is, the optics are ICE is all immigration. And let's say I knew some of those guys on the list. I was classmates with one of them. Really good guys. I just think that memo was taken out of context.
We'll find out. I want you to hear what Andy Biggs said. This is Cut 38. He talked about how these Democrats are now think they have an issue running against people like you. The organization used to be in Jason Piccolo. Let's listen.
Certainly, you can make some reforms, and I agree with him on that. But understand that Jay Johnson and many people who are on that side of the issue opposite of where I am, they want to perpetuate the catch and release. And so when I see people that actually promulgated the catch and release under Mr. Johnson, under his predecessor, Janet Napolitano, they're now serving in supervisory positions even under this administration. So you still have catch and release, and that's one of the big incentives for people to come to this country illegally and to make statements asserting that they're asylum and refugee status. And so they know they're going to be released into the interior, and that's a problem.
Catch and release, by the way, is still happening because there's not enough facilities to put everybody, especially with the child and the parent being kept together. Now the facility's going to shrink rapidly. You're going to be setting up tent cities at the border. It's going to be your only choice right now. Jason, is that the status?
It's going to have to be your only choice. How are you going to vet these people that are coming across the border? I brought up a story once before about when I worked for the human smuggling cell of parents getting accompanied, not parents, but adults getting accompanied with minors using fraudulent passports. You have to set up somewhere where you could vet these children and vet these adults. And unfortunately, the call down in South America, down in Central America, is that if you come to the United States, you might have the possibility of some sort of immigration parole or release. And there's just simply not enough bed space. Congress gives you 34,000. Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
And Jason, what I'm thinking is, with all this controversy and the ugliness of having such trouble getting the parents and children back together, right now there's about 2,000. I guess they're looking to match up 2,000. We've sent them out different directions. I cannot believe there's not a quick way to get this to happen, but whatever. Is the word getting out to Honduras and Ecuador and others not a good time to come to America?
Well, that's going to be up to our immigration officials down south. We have tons of consulate offices. We have ICE representatives down there. We have FBI, DEA. Everybody's got to get the words out to their sources that this needs a change. And you got to remember the other thing. Everybody calls for the abolishment of ICE, but a lot of people don't realize the cycle. The immigrant comes in across the border. They get if they're coming in out of a designated port of entry, Border Patrol will get them. If they come in a Border Patrol, if they come into a port of entry, Customs and Border Protection gets them. Then ICE gets them, and then ICE releases them to Health and Human Services, who then releases them to the Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement. Now, they're the ones that release them to a contracted facility. Now, that's where there's a big disconnect on what ICE does right now.
I want you to hear Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez. Let's listen.
What do you mean about ICE black sites?
Basically, what we have is that people are not able to access, even our own members of Congress are not able to access what is happening in these sites. And that in and of itself, the secretive nature, and when we know that children are being kept and that human rights abuses are happening in without any sort of transparency or accountability, that is where we're at right now. That is simply what is happening.
She makes sense to you?
Negative. What happens is she's watched too much Zero Dark 30. There are no ICE black sites. There simply aren't. Now, you got to remember, when they say human rights violations are happening, ICE employees, HHS employees, Health and Human Services employees are all mothers and fathers. Like I said before, they come from everywhere and anything. Nobody wants to hurt a young child. I mean, I blew the whistle. I saw little 10-year-age kids getting released by the Obama administration. So there's people like me there. There's tons of really
What do you mean?
people there.
What do you mean you got 10-year-olds?
Tender age. I mean, like little kids. When I was working for the Obama administration, you know, the kids would get put over to Health and Human Services. They get released to a contracted facility, and then the contracted facility was not vetting these sponsors. Sponsors come forward. They may have a criminal record. For some reason, they weren't conducting thorough background checks to include fingerprints or working with the FBI. And by then, there was absolutely no DNA.
Unbelievable. All right, Jason, I guess overall, when you talk to your buddies in ICE now, despite the protests and at Border Patrol, do they sense this is an administration that has their back, or there's too many mixed signals? What do you get the feeling?
Definitely. I was in ICE for years before this, and for 8 years, you know, the pure abuse administration did not have the backs of the officers, I felt, and I think a lot of my friends feel the same way. Now you have the vice president, and you have the president coming out on social media, on the news, everywhere, saying they are absolutely behind these officers and these agents. It's mind-boggling if you've been in the agency to have such support. We never had that before, and there's some really, really good people that work down that line.
Gotcha. Hey, Jason, thanks so much for what you do. We use your expertise along the line, especially when people want to make this a catchphrase to get themselves elected. I think when you're messing with law enforcement, people make $60,000 a year to put their lives on the line, and then you find out that they've been painted as the bad guy. Are you kidding? It's just
Brian,
incredible.
One other thing, too, is there was a congressman, senator came out today saying ICE is incompetent. I just really take offense to that. And if they want to, you know, debate me all day long, I'll tell you about the competent people I used to work with. Thanks a lot for having me, Brian.
Go get him, Jason Piccolo. I appreciate it. When we come back, your turn. 1-866-408-7669. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show. We're talking about North Korea and Mike Pompeo's, I think, not disastrous, but pretty negative talk, 2-day talks, 30 hours in North Korea, being called a gangsta by his approach. Are you kidding me? And next, the president goes to NATO, and of course, his Supreme Court justice pick tonight at 9 o'clock. Will Democrats find a way to stop whoever is nominated? 1-866-408-7669. We'll do that on a busy Monday. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show.
Disagree with Brian? Call now and tell him why.
Can somebody attack me, please?
866-408-7669. It's Brian Kilmeade.
Everybody, welcome back. 1-866. Time to get on the line, so go do it. 1-866-408-7669. And thanks to all of you for listening to the show. I mean, the ratings have been gone through the roof. We had the best June maybe ever. The affiliate list is growing, and the audience is growing. We can't thank you enough for coming here. We try to give you the latest information, including some great news. Fox is now reporting that 8 of the Thai soccer players are out of the cave, and they are still working. Remember, day one was 4. They already got 4. There's concern that it's starting to rain again, so they're trying to make it a little less perilous by trying to get even more and more out. Obviously, the 25-year-old coach has written an apology to everyone. It was pouring rain out. They went for shelter. They ended up going deep and getting stuck. a miraculous series of events. The other big news is Michael Goodwin, 25 minutes ago, was on expounding on his column that made a lot of headlines that Hillary Clinton's actually poised for a 2020 run. Marianne, listening on WXJB in Ocala. Hey, Marianne.
Hi, Brian.
Do you think it's true?
Okay. Well, yeah, I think it's true because they're so brazen. And I'm 58 years old, and never in my life have I seen anybody in this country that was so I'm in college, and they're teaching these kids to hate America. They're teaching these kids that unless you're white, you are biased and racist. And I'm just floored at how Hillary can even try to be president with all the crimes that she's committed.
Listen, you heard what she's doing. She's consolidating, earning, saving. But we already saw this before. She had the most money in 2008. She was in the prime of her career, coming off 2 successful Senate runs. Her husband's ratings were in the 60s, and she lost to Barack Obama, who had 2 years' experience. Then she comes out, gets a nomination, and gets a run for her money from a 70-year-old socialist. And then the only reason she wins that easily is because she owned the DNC, who was buried in debt. And then she goes and loses to a first-time candidate in President Trump, who everyone thought was eminently beatable. She had everything going for him. There was no fractured Democratic Party. There's no Pat Buchanan weighing down Bush 41. There was no Ross Perot hurting Bush 41. There was no third-party candidate. There was no Ralph Nader hurting Al Gore. She had everything. In 2020, her health is questionable. She's wearing scarves in the summer. You can't tell me that she's going to be healthier this time around. And what Democrat's going to rally behind her? They're already turning on her.
I understand that all, but how can it be that if you commit these crimes that you can run? Where's the justice at all in this country? Where's the justice?
Well, we're not done yet. Now, Horowitz is focusing on Russia. He's deciding on criminal referral for some others. But I guess Hillary Clinton is going to escape. Thanks so much, Marianne. I understand the outrage. Real quick, we told you about the cave. Tonight at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, Monday night, the president will make his selection. We saw the word from Senator Orrin Hatch in a column in the Desert News referred to using the pronoun her and she. Does he know something? Mitch McConnell says, hey, Mr. President, I am the one who has to get this done. Don McGahn and I agree on a couple of things. Kavanaugh would be easier for us to get it done. Go ahead, put Kavanaugh and Kethledge up there. Excuse me. He's for Kethledge and he's for Hardiman. He believes those would be the easiest paths. There's a lot of strong case to put there. There's also what I believe, and I believe Senator Lindsey Graham is right. The president's got Final Four. There are 4 lottery tickets, and they're all winners. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show. Don't move.
From the Fox News radio studios in New York City, fresh off the set of Fox and Friends, it's America's receptive voice, Brian Kilmeade.
Wow. Hi, everybody. Big show coming your way. Big day. It's amazing how many balls are in the air, including the story of this the Thai soccer team trying to get out of that cave. We got 8 boys out, thanks to the world community. A lot of brave people, a lot of innovative people using a relay system to be able to pass these kids along the line, walking some areas, swimming others, scubaing through, and then right to the hospital. We're up to 8. So we started the day with 12 being held. So you take another 4 out of that. So you still got to get the rest of the team as well as the coach out. So keep your fingers crossed. We already lost to Navy. The Thailand lost one of their Navy SEALs, and America is playing a big role. 1-866-408-7669. I'll be able to take your calls in 11 minutes. And then at the bottom of the hour, Dan will be with us in a little while. Dan Hoffman will be with us. You know, he was running the office over in Russia for the CIA, but more importantly now, he's working for us. He's going to bring us insight to the Vladimir Putin, President Trump message, as well as what has to come out of NATO, as well as the ugly situation that happened in the 30 hours Mike Pompeo was on the ground in North Korea. So let's get to the big three.
Now, with the biggest things you need to know, to the power of three, it's Brian's Big Three. Number 3.
I'm concerned that instead what we're going to see is a repeat of last month's show where President Trump went to the G7 summit in Canada and put a thumb in the eye of the Prime Minister of Canada and picked fights with our vital allies.
Pick fights, or they put a thumb in everybody else's eyes, too. I don't think that there was no culpability with the other members of the G7. But Chris Coons, who's as level-headed as any Democrat, is a little worried about things going into this consequential NATO summit with 28 of our allies. And the president's focus, will it be on the improved spending amongst those in this alliance, or will he focus on those who have not hit the 2% threshold of the GDP, which is most of them? My sense is the president will surprise again and talk more about a unity message than the lack of spending message.
Number 2.
I think Secretary Pompeo, I'm going to give him some credit. You know, he's had 3 visits to North Korea. The first 2 to set up the summit were good. But this one, I don't think turned out well.
Yeah, you're right, Bill Richardson. Gangsta-like was the description from the North Korean side, as the officials described Mike Pompeo this weekend after the meetings in North Korea. We need a timeline and a declaration of Kim Jong-un's Hermit Boys. They are playing a game right now. Rocket Man needs an attitude adjustment. Will Trump give it to him?
Number 1.
I'm getting very close to making a final decision, and I believe this person will do a great job. They're excellent. Everyone, you can't go wrong.
The president had a 9 o'clock this morning meeting today. He says he's going to decide by noon, and at 9 o'clock, we'll all know. Who will he pick? Let's turn to the great Stephen Hayes. He runs things at the Weekly Standard. He has all the keys to get into all the offices, and he carries them on in a big key ring, too. So if someone's locked out or needs to work on a Saturday, you got to run in. Am I right, Steve?
I do that, yeah, exactly. I go around and open up all the doors for anybody who needs it at any hour of the day.
That's the bad part about being an editor.
Well, these are the sacrifices we make, right?
And Steve Hayes is not going to be talking about the acquisition of Rooney for the D.C. United, which is going to bring some more people into the stands there for the MLS as he focuses on England in the Final Four now in the World Cup. But, Steve, we're not going to touch your soccer expertise. You were prophetic in your column a few weeks ago in talking about the dangers of the Singapore summit. The president felt as though the risk was worth it. What did we learn after the last 30 hours?
Yeah, look, I think that the president and his supporters can rightly claim credit for changing the failed approach to North Korea that we'd seen over 3 successive administrations that preceded him, where they basically outsourced the diplomacy to China, assumed that the U.S. and China had identical interests where we just have overlapping interests. And the president came in and said, we're not going to do that anymore. It didn't work. And he's right about that. I think the problem is he went from this campaign of maximum pressure, which seemed to be having some effect, to a campaign now of maximum affection, where he's taking Kim Jong-un and serving as sort of a character witness for the murderous dictator from North Korea and saying, I believe he means it. This is going to work. North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat. So one statement after another we saw coming out of the summit that I think were unfortunate, irresponsible things to say, because plainly North Korea was still a nuclear threat. But they also make Mike Pompeo's job that much harder, because now you're Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, going to North Korea, sitting down in Pyongyang and saying, we have to come up with some kind of a verification regime. And the North Koreans can look across the table and say, why, Mr. Secretary? Your president's already said we're no longer a nuclear threat. But I think that's part of the problem. And we saw, as you pointed out in your intro, I think the North Koreans are tweaking us here. They're mocking us. If you read the New York Times account of the meetings and what they were saying and how they were sort of needling Pompeo, this isn't a good situation that we've gotten ourselves into.
Absolutely not. And, they put him in a weird bungalow instead of a hotel where he could see the mausoleum. Evidently, they kept mocking him, saying, did you sleep well last night? And then they said, well, you're acting like gangsta, and this is just fake news on the car ride back. So they had no progress. There was extremely long dinners where nothing got done. They had about 9 courses of meals. Pompeo evidently was steaming. He wanted to get to work. When they finally got to work, he didn't even get a cameo with Kim Jong-un. He just left. They tried to push for it. Now look, there's other cards to play, Steve. Everything's unorthodox. And I think you realize that. Everything that we see for the next 3 years, two and a half years, is going to be unorthodox. And some are going to work out and some won't. Now, the next time that Donald Trump sits down in his next interview, he could say, I'm disappointed. I thought we had an understanding, but judging by the way he treated my Secretary of State, we're going to have to revisit this relationship. And, I thought I could trust him at his word. Clearly, it's not working out that way. What a shame. I could have dealt him in. We all were set to help out, but we're not going to be able to do that now. That's going to force him to act. But it does no good for both of them to have the same mindset. But I'm sure Pompeo, with West Point grad, tough guy, we know him, he's not going to come back and try to sugarcoat it to the president. He might try to do it with us. Meanwhile, looming in the background is Ambassador Bolton. He didn't even want this to happen to begin with.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. And look, I feel better that you have people like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton there sitting next to the president and making clear that he at least appreciates the history of North Korea's 30 years of mendacity on these issues and really on everything else. But my concern is, now that the president took basically a victory lap after the summit where not much was achieved. I mean, basically there was a piece of paper where North Korea promised to do what North Korea had been promising to do for nearly 3 decades and never done. So that I think was highly problematic, that the president took this victory lap. And as I say, I think it makes these next steps even more difficult. The president joked in his post-summit press conference that he could be wrong about Kim Jong-un. I mean, he said, look, I think he's going to do these things. I honestly believe that he's going to do these things, but I may be wrong, and you may see me in 6 months admitting I'm wrong. And then he stopped himself and said, well, no, I probably won't admit it. I hope he admits it. If he comes to the conclusion where he thinks he was wrong, I think it's going to be important for him to say, you know what, just as you laid out, Brian, I mean, you know what? I misjudged this guy. I thought that we had made some strides. We hadn't. These guys are not trustworthy, and we're going to have to ramp up maximum pressure again and lean once again on the Chinese with a more aggressive approach that I think the president believes he can use by commingling the trade talks he's having with China and this diplomacy on North Korea.
And, of course, he gets to meet with the other person breaking the sanctions, and that's Vladimir Putin in a couple of weeks. And we know China has eased things, and the president made it clear that, he almost opened the door to ease things because he thought we were on the right track. But I actually think there's a way the president could say I could have misjudged him by saying I thought he was being truthful to me without looking bad, because he could say, listen, no other president has ever given North Korea the option and the opportunity that I gave, and no one will afterwards. So they could decide what it's going to be like. And they've decided that they like starving their people and being an outlaw hermit kingdom. So that's their decision, and they could start pressing the Chinese, who are kind of mad at us because of what's going on with trade. It's amazing. Now I know why you haven't had a chance to come on with me enough, because there's 5 major stories going on at the same time. Next, I want to bring I mean, I get it. I used to take it personal until I just realized now, Steve Hayes, how many major stories did you got to stay on top of with the Weekly Standard and Fox News? But I want to bring you to the summit, the Russian summit. Here is what Senator Lindsey Graham, who's friendly with the president but does not sing this, from the same hymn sheet on every issue. Cut 27.
Given Russia's behavior, absolutely not. Russia was supposed to make sure that Assad had no chemical weapons. The last thing you can rely upon is the Russians to take care of American and Israeli interests.
And he's talking about, can they be trusted to limit Iran's access to the border of Syria and Israel? And can we trust them to agree on anything? And he says, no, you can't. Are you into that? Are you the same mindset?
I am. I agree with him entirely, and I think it's long past time to get tough with Russia. I mean, I think the president made clear that he wants Russia to be a friend. He came in, he sort of extended the hand of friendship. He wanted Vladimir Putin to change. Vladimir Putin hasn't changed. Vladimir Putin isn't changing. Vladimir Putin is not fine, as the president said at his rally in Montana last week. Vladimir Putin is at least an adversary. I consider him an enemy of the United States. He's actively undermining our 2018 electoral process. He meddled in the 2016 electoral process. Whatever you think of the Mueller investigation, it's plain that Russia meddled in the process. He invaded the Crimean Peninsula, for which we were going to isolate them. The Obama administration didn't isolate them. The Trump administration hasn't isolated them effectively, even though they've imposed some additional sanctions. I think it's time to get tough with Vladimir Putin, and at the very least, take a step back, take your foot off the gas on your criticism of NATO, which I think is a bulwark against Russian aggression and Russian expansionism. Fine if the president wants NATO countries to pay their fair share, to pay more. That's an issue. It's a legitimate issue. The president can push on that. But we shouldn't mistake that for being the most important issue. The most important issue is Russia and what Russia's up to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's going to have more of a positive than negative. He's going to point out 6 countries are hitting the mark. And you know who, you know what, more and more are getting closer. And we're going to see if we can move that timeline up from 2024 when all pledged to do so. But I think he already made progress. It's pointed out they got a quick reaction force now. They can act on air, land, and sea within 30 days. They have a cyber defense force now. That was on President Trump's volition. He was the one who said, guys, you got to modernize this. They've already done so many positive things. I think the president sees a positive in being positive coming out of this because the message has been sent. And do you know, it's hard to predict President Trump, but do you think I'm right or do you think it's more G7-like in the aftermath of this NATO summit?
I hope you're right. I hope you're right. That would be a positive development. I think if we hear that kind of rhetoric from the president, and as I say, there's nothing wrong with needling the NATO countries to make good on the promises that they have made in the past. I mean, this doesn't come from nowhere. They've made these promises, and they're not fulfilling the promises they themselves have made as part of the overall pact. But I think it will be incumbent upon the president, even if he sort of emphasizes the positive, to make clear that what Russia has done, what Russia continues to do, is problematic for the United States. It's problematic for the broader NATO alliance, and to make sure that Vladimir Putin understands that. And I will be a happy guy if we hear that kind of tough talk from the president on Vladimir Putin and some positive talk about NATO.
I just see, I know once he gets into these meetings, he tends to get almost euphoric because he feels like he's making progress and gets the respect because our economy and military has a lot to. Now you cannot say we're diminishing militarily. We put $700 billion into it. You cannot say we're struggling economically. We have as strong economy as anybody in the world. And you can't say that Russia is flourishing economically. And, you know, it is costing them to be in Syria and to be in the Ukraine on a regular basis. It would be great for the president to turn up the heat there. I hope he does. And lastly, in the big picture tonight, what do you expect, or what do you, who do you want least in the Final Four, and who do you hope he picks?
So I don't mean this as a dodge on your question. I think he's got a great Final Four. If those are in fact the finalists, people who view the world the way that I do, people who are originalists and conservatives on the court should be happy, should be thrilled at these developments. And I think he can't really go wrong with any of the four. I mean, obviously, you've heard people talk about Kethledge's strengths as a writer and as a thinker. Amy Coney Barrett, of course, has, I think, would pick an interesting and important political fight with some Democrats, and she's handled herself extraordinarily well, has the backing of, many of her former students. We had an article on our website by Alice Lloyd talking to her students and the kind of professor she was at Notre Dame Law School. She is brilliant and I think has been unfairly maligned in the press. And you look at Brett Kavanaugh as well. People speak very highly of his intellect. People who have worked with him in the past and who have read his writings more carefully than I have. And Hardiman, of course, was a potential finalist last time around. So I think he's for 4 for 4. The president is on these picks. And I think whichever one he picks, conservatives are likely to be pretty happy in a month and in 5 years about the way that the court is changing.
And, Steve, you're so intriguing, and it's been so long. I actually won 2.5 minutes over. That's how special you should feel today.
Can I tell you how special that makes me feel, Brian?
And I didn't even make you dress up or wear makeup. Just a phone call. Stephen Hayes, a Weekly Standard. I get 20% off on my issues because I know Steve. He's got all the keys to every office. Steve, thanks so much.
Anytime, Brian. Thanks.
1-866-408-7669. You're next. And then Daniel Hoffman brings us inside the Russia summit. A lot going on today. We now know there's just 4 kids and 1 coach left trapped in that cave. Keep your fingers crossed that number goes down. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show.
Politics, current events, and news that affects you. Brian's got a lot more to say. Stay with Brian Kilmeade.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I got some news for you. The president just must have heard us with Stephen Hayes. Tweeted this out. I have confidence that Kim Jong-un will honor the contract we signed, and even more importantly, our handshake. We agreed to the denuclearization of North Korea. China, on the other hand, may be exerting negative pressure on a deal because of our posture on Chinese trade. Hope not! ! Amazing. Kevin, listening online in Virginia. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, good morning, Brian. Boy, tonight's Supreme Court pick is huge. It could be a pivotal point in U.S. history, and I'm really looking forward to it. But I just read something that on one of the 4 candidates that's totally swayed my opinion that should be the one. And Amy Coney Barrett, I didn't know much about her, but I just read that she was a law clerk for Justice Antonin Scalia, and that means Scalia vetted her.
Good point. Carol, yeah, that's going to be great. Look out for her. Carol, listen on KOLT AM in Carl, I should say, in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Hey, Carl.
Hey, Brian, a great show. I enjoy listening to you. Just going back to your last hour, you were asking about Hillary. I just wanted to say that, the rule of law is the most important thing that our Constitution has given us. And when we have people out there that are usurping the law, they need to be held accountable. Now, there's all kinds of people that are talking about Hillary being guilty of all this stuff. She's not guilty of anything until it has gone to court and has been adjudicated. And either she's guilty or she's not guilty.
Yeah, she's guilty, and she's washed up. She's done. She's finished. She's through. She's a terrible candidate. She knows celebrities. Her husband can't even help her anymore. She destroyed him and his reputation while she ran, and he did a lot himself. So she's done.
From his mouth to your ears, it's Brian Kilmeade.
I would just caution the president as we move forward with any discussions with Russia. Obviously, Russia is not our friend. We oppose many of the actions that they've taken, going back to the invasion of Crimea and so forth. So I would be very cautious in those moves. But if there is a way that we can partner and put a lid on Iran, I would support that. But again, being very cautious, because I don't see that Russia would ever be a true friend or ally to the United States of America.
And that is Senator Joni Ernst, obviously a military veteran and very respectful of the president, but she is worried, like a lot of people worried, that the president's going to give too much up and try to be too good friends with a guy that's proven nothing but anti-American. But maybe I'm overstating it. Dan Hoffman joins us right now. Dan, you worked in Russia for how many years?
5 years, Brian.
5 years. During whose reign?
So I was there from 1995 to 98, just before Vladimir Putin. I was there during economic collapse, which helped bring about the opportunity for Putin to become essentially the czar of Russia. And then I went back because I liked it so much from 2008 to 2010.
It's just beautiful. I guess it does look pretty good from the World Cup perspective, but from your perspective in the CIA, do you think the president is fully understanding that Russia is our enemy, or do you believe I'm mischaracterizing them?
I think that first of all, I think the administration has a very clear understanding of the extent to which Russia is our enemy. National Security Advisor Ambassador Bolton called Russia's meddling in our election an act of war. So that's a very clear statement. But I also believe we got to remember that in the darkest days of the Cold War, President Reagan was engaging with the Soviets. He was calling them out on human rights abuses, and very eloquently at that, and at the same time having very critically important arms control discussions. It's fine to talk to them. We have to remember that we're on the world stage, and what we say matters not just to Vladimir Putin, but to those who oppose the Russian regime. Everybody's listening to us. But the discussions are important to have, and I do believe, there's a lot of areas that we need to talk about. I think Syria and North Korea may be the most challenging, but how about extending the START treaty, which is supposed to expire in February 2021, or counterterrorism operations or counterproliferation, organized crime. Those have been areas traditionally where we have worked well together.
Perhaps. So let's look at the Syria situation. I've heard experts in the area saying the President Putin does not have the pull on Iran that we want him to have. We're saying we need Iran, and Israel wants Iran back out away from the Syrian-Israeli border. And we want them to pledge to do so. In turn, I guess, will acknowledge that Assad stays, and we will stop financing the Free Syrian Army. I have or relinquish our presence in Syria. I got a problem with giving up either one of those things. Do you?
Yeah, I was always more in favor of a greater U.S. footprint. Frankly, it's one of the things that many things that John Brennan didn't appreciate about my assessment of what was really at stake in Syria. And we've seen a lot of it play out with a massive refugee crisis that has changed the political landscape in Europe and risked terrorist attacks in North Africa and the Middle East as a result. Iran has a foothold in Syria like they never had before, and Hezbollah, and it threatens Israel. There's two big things that I think the president could be discussing with Putin. One is obviously ISIS. The other one is the risk of an Iran-Israel war, because you're absolutely right. Iran is using Hezbollah and their own IRGC Quds Force to encroach upon areas of near the Golan Heights, which threatens Israel. That gets to the point of existential threat. Israel has attacked Iranian facilities. So I think we do need a military footprint there, and I do think we need more of an interventionist foreign policy to protect our interests and those of our allies.
Michael McFaul, the former ambassador to Moscow under President Obama, says, quote, I think it's a gross overstatement to suggest that Putin can order the Iranian militias out of Syria. He does not have that kind of leverage over Iran. That's correct?
Yeah, he's 100% right about that. The Russians and the Russians don't have command and control over Iran. They are allies for now, though they have been historical competitors. And the Iranians, for them, Syria, really that's an existential part of their national security strategy, support to Assad. For Russia, it was a chance to get back into the Middle East, which they've done. It's not turned out to be the quagmire President Obama said it would be. They're on good terms with Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Israel, obviously Iran, and Syria. The Russians have more leverage in the Middle East than they've had since the collapse of the Soviet Union. But they don't have the leverage to influence Iran's policy. Israel may be able to influence it, but if they do that, it's going to be with, bare knuckles deterrence and striking Iran when Iran violates Israel's interests.
Kay Bailey Hutchinson weighed in on something else Russia is up to, Cut 30.
I do think Russia is trying to flip Turkey. They're trying to flip many of our allies. They want to destabilize the strongest defense alliance in the history of the world, and that is NATO. Turkey is one of our alliance most strong members. They are a framework nation helping us in Afghanistan. They have been an ally for a long time, and we will continue to work with them. And we know that Russia is trying to move into that, but they're strong, and they are a NATO strong member.
Listen, she's an ambassador to NATO. I get it. She's a diplomat. But she cannot say that Turkey has been a positive. They are seen to be closer to Russia than to us. They're trying to buy that defense, that SR defense system, and they try to use our F-35s and use the Russian defense system, therefore exposing all our technology. Right. Are they kidding?
Right. Yeah, they've been a very troubling ally, NATO member, partner. But I would say this, that I agree with that that Russia, look, NATO was designed to contain the Soviet Union. The Soviet policy and Russia's today is to try to drive a wedge between the United States and NATO, and try to drive a wedge between the United States and Germany, which has traditionally been our most important ally in NATO. What really scares Vladimir Putin is democracy. And what scares him in particular is that Ukraine is tilting now towards the European Union and NATO. They would like to become a member of both of those organizations. And Ukraine is a threat to Russia. You know, any country with a commitment to democracy and a sizable Russian-speaking population in post-Soviet space. Remember, Putin said the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. That's the number one most important issue to Vladimir Putin heading into this summit. I think it's one that we should be tracking closely to see how President Trump manages that.
In a couple of minutes, I'll be taking calls, 1-866-408-7669. So let's look what they did. They carved up Georgia. They stayed. They carved up the Ukraine. They're still there. They took Crimea. We know that. Flew into Syria and put their presence, complicit in the killing of tens of thousands of people in Syria, many of which are not terrorists. No interest, really, in the humanitarian aspect of there. They want their influence there. And now you have a situation where they're poisoning people in other countries. We know what they did to those two former Russian spies. Do you think they had a role in the death of that woman over the weekend in Britain? Because the poison used, they say, dates back to the Soviet era. What do you think?
Well, there's no question that Novichok is a Soviet chemical that, was designed by the Soviets, used by the Soviets, stored by the Soviets, and now the Russians. There's no doubt in my mind that Putin designed that operation to target Sergei Skripal just a couple of weeks before the Russian election in order to drive his own people into a frenzy, to get them to the ballot box over some ostensible threat from the West, because the Brits responded as they should have by declaring a number of Russians persona non grata, and we followed in kind. And Putin portrayed himself as the defender of a Russian besieged fortress. Vladimir Putin is a KGB guy. I mean, that's his formative experience, and we've witnessed over the past 20 years of his rule a resurgent Russia, which is so antithetical to our national security interests. We need to counter them, not only in geographic space and cyberspace, but also in the war of ideas.
Those Medvedev, I guess, gave people a lot of hope, but I guess behind the scenes, do you believe that even when Medvedev was the president, that Putin was still calling the shots?
I mean, that was Vladimir Putin's stage acting. He wanted us to believe that there might be some changes because he wanted to induce the Obama administration to pursue this ill-fated and, in my view, very naive reset policy. And I don't know how you reset anything after Russia, as you correctly pointed out, had boots on the ground inside Georgia, violated their territorial integrity, launched a cyber attack in Estonia the year before that in 2007. I mean, I think that just gave Vladimir Putin all of the confidence that he would have needed to continue his overly aggressive foreign policy.
I believe Senator Lindsey Graham is speaking in your language, Dan Hoffman, when he said this yesterday, cut 28.
When Putin denies that he was involved in our election in 2016, reject the denial. Challenge him. Don't let him deny the obvious. They're still trying to disrupt the 2018 election cycle.
And the president's got to sit there and not say, well, he keeps saying that. He's got to say, well, listen, here's what we know. And to say, deny this specifically, and tell us, you were not, come back, don't just have a conversation, come back with some facts on the guy. Because believe me, Putin studied Trump.
Right. I think that's important for our foreign policy. I also think it makes sense heading into the midterms. If the president wants to distinguish himself from naive Democrats who want to abolish ICE and who themselves fell victim to Vladimir Putin's foreign policy with the reset policy and giving up too much on the Iran nuclear deal and on Syria, then the president could pursue a forceful policy where he explains directly what the Russians are up to and why and how we plan on countering it. And even though Vladimir Putin is going to stick to his guns and deny any involvement, we know the truth behind the Cheshire grin that the Russians were meddling in our election. And, the Senate Intel Committee has confirmed that. Our intelligence community has confirmed that. I think the president would do well, again, to distinguish himself from John Brennan and others who are criticizing him. The best way to deal with those people is to say, hey, look, I'm the one who's being clear-eyed on the Russian threat, unlike you all were for 8 years.
Dan, thanks so much. Are you making the trip over there?
We're in discussion right now. You know, I lived in Finland for a couple of years, speak the language, and it's a historic site. Helsinki Accords there were signed in 1975. President Bush met with Gorbachev in 1990. I kind of hoping I make my way over there. It's going to be a historical summit for sure.
I'll give you my American Express because I want you over there so I can call you and find out what's going on, okay?
Hey, Brian, you got it. Anytime.
All right. Dan Hoffman, thanks so much. 1-866-408-7669. We're going to come back with your phone calls and get you to weigh in on this, as well as 9 o'clock tonight. We do know at 9 o'clock tonight, the president will name the name Supreme Court Justice. At 9:01, every Democrat will declare that person, man or woman, the worst person ever nominated. And we'll watch it all battle out all the way through September when he finally gets his hearings, or she gets her hearings. You listen to the Brian Kilmeade Show. Don't move.
It's Brian Kilmeade.
Hey, we're back, everyone. 1-866-408-7669. We've got a few minutes to talk about what's going on. We do have some good news. We now have 8 of the soccer players out of that tie cave. We do have 4 left, and they are done with operating, including the coach. That makes it 5. They're done with operations for the day. So 2 days, 8 people out. Unbelievable news, but we're not out of the woods yet. Ed, listen on WIBX in Westboro, New York. Hey, Ed.
How you doing?
Hey, what's on your mind?
Yeah, I was just listening to you, and you said something about, and I'm not arguing with you, but you said something about the Democrats being naive about, trying to get rid of ICE. I don't believe they're naive at all. I believe they're coming up with things. They're grasping at straws for something for the midterm, some issue they can bite into, and maybe make people interested in that, and separating these children from the adults at the border, and all of this stuff. I mean, they don't believe a word of what they're saying. And sadly, people pick up on these, like Fox. They pick up on these things like they were legitimate issues that that the Democrats really believe in. Like I said, getting rid of ICE. They're just looking for things that maybe an issue, because they don't have any program at all. They have absolutely no clue to how they're going to better the lives of the American people, and so they're trying to sell these issues as something legitimate, getting rid of ICE. And of course it's ridiculous, but I don't believe they're naive, and like that they really believe that getting rid of them is going to, they're just
I interviewed something. But I interviewed the man who's putting the legislation forward, the congressman, who says, yeah, we got to get rid of them. Their brand is too damaged. Their brand is too damaged. What are they, Nike? It's not damage. It's a form of law enforcement of getting illegal immigrants either getting their status changed or getting them out. I mean, what are you talking about? But to have a 28-year-old start this first-time politician, not putting her down, but she's a socialist, and to think that you're going to take your cues from her in the most liberal area of New York City, and to think there's a national platform. The DNC chair says that she is the new leader. That's a new leadership voice. So, and that's what she's saying, and she's getting a lot of airtime about it. Very little pushback. But, as Jay Johnson, who was the former Homeland Security Secretary under President Obama, came out and says, no, if you want reform ICE, go ahead. Tell us what you want to change. But you can't get rid of ICE. It's like his analogy was perfect. You may not like the Vietnam War in the 60s, but you didn't say abolish the Defense Department. So
they don't believe that ICE, getting rid of ICE, they don't believe in that. They're just trying to sell it as an issue for the midterms, because if they don't, they have nothing.
Well, they did come up with a plan that says a better deal, obviously on better deal for President Trump. And they felt as though they had a great issue and no one was writing about it because President Trump swamped everything with the North Korean deal, the trade war, the NATO, the G7, the North, everything that he's doing. So they felt as though they lost the dialogue. But Bob's listening to WPTF in Durham, North Carolina. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Brian. I always enjoy listening to you and watching you on TV. You got one of the greatest personalities out there. I wanted to start off
Thanks
with
so
that
much, Bob.
because that's the way you come across to me. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Putin. To me, he's following in Adolf Hitler's footsteps. In World War II, or prior to World War II, Hitler was trying to gobble up various little pieces of Europe by claiming that the ethnic Germans there were being mistreated, the Sudetenland, and as he started off down there. And so it looks like Putin's trying to do the same thing. So Stalin
and I know what you're saying, Bob. I know what you're saying. You're saying, well, there's Russian-speaking people in Estonia. There's more Russian people speaking in Ukraine. That's why I took Crimea. It's helping Crimea. These are the people that really belong to be Russia. And if you listen to his interview with Oliver Stone, one of the things he said is, I said the worst thing to happen in the last century was the collapse of the Soviet Union because it left all these Russian citizens as illegal immigrants in countries they didn't want to belong to. They wanted to belong to Russia. They lost the Soviet Union. Therefore, they were people without a country. And you are right. And that's what Hitler used to say. Yeah, I got German-speaking people in Sudetenland. I got to take the Czech Republic. And he did. And then the British said, okay, just stop there. And he didn't. So Putin has to be stopped. The good news is Putin does not have the economic arsenal Germany had, and he doesn't have the military hardware Germany had, and he's got us to fight against.
From the Fox News radio studios in New York City, information you want, truth you demand. It's Brian Kilmeade.
Hi, everyone. Brian Kilmeade here. Thanks so much for listening. It's going to be a big hour. We have some great news about the Thai soccer kids. We have 8 of them out. 4 are still in, along with the coach. So we'll be following that story as the hazardous rescue operation continues. That's going to be breaking news. But I do understand that they have shut off initiation rescue efforts for the night. And hopefully the rain has come back, but hopefully not too hard to make things even more difficult tomorrow. I did hear that they were trying to get the strongest out first. So the worst may be yet to come. Let's keep our fingers crossed it's not. Meanwhile, let's get to the Big Three.
Now, with the stories you need to know, it's Brian's Big Three. Number 3.
I'm concerned that instead what we're going to see is a repeat of last month's show where President Trump went to the G7 summit in Canada and put a thumb in the eye of the Prime Minister of Canada and picked fights with our vital allies.
Pick fights or confronted them about trade. I thought you could do that, but the president was quite aggressive, and he did not like the communique at the end when they seemed to go back against what they agreed on behind closed doors. That was Senator Chris Coons, a guy you count on to be level-headed, and for the most part he is. But the NATO summit takes place. Will our 28 allies look to get along this week? Will the president focus on the improved spending or focus on how many countries are falling short? I say he ends up more positive. He tends to zig when you expect him to zag.
Number 2.
I think Secretary Pompeo, I'm going to give him some credit. You know, he's had 3 visits to North Korea. The first 2 to set up the summit were good. But this one, I don't think turned out well.
Yeah, in fact, they called him gangster-like. That's how much North Korean officials described Mike Pompeo's meeting over the weekend in North Korea. We need a timeline, and we need a declaration of a nuclear arsenal from Kim Jong-un's hermit boys. They are playing games. Rocket Man needs an attitude adjustment. Will Trump give it to him? A tweet just went out saying the president expects Kim Jong-un to adhere to what he signed off on when they met face-to-face. We'll see.
Number 1.
I'm getting very close to making a final decision, and I believe this person will do a great job. They're excellent. Everyone, you can't go wrong.
Wow. The President of the United States speaking as he left his New Jersey golf club en route back to the White House. He says at 9 o'clock when he met this morning, they discussed the finalists. By noon, they would decide. And by 9 o'clock, we'll all know. As Lindsey Graham pointed out, from a conservative perspective, they got a Final Four. All 4 of those cards are lotto tickets. But I'm not going to start there. And we'll be taking your calls in a little while. I'm going to go out to Ambassador David Fried, a great writer, columnist, Daniel Fried, and he was a former ambassador to Poland, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, former assistant secretary of state for the Eurasia Group, and former national security director under President Bush. He also did some work with President Obama, and like many people out there, know that this NATO summit is going to be anything but typical. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Ambassador, first off, the meeting with Theresa May, she's somebody with her own political problems. How do you think that's going to go with our president, knowing the mayor is going to allow a giant balloon of a baby Donald Trump, and then there's going to be protesters all around? How do you think that's going to go?
I remember going to London with President Bush in 2003, and there were huge demonstrations in London against him. It was over the Iraq War. And he was completely relaxed. He didn't get mad. He was working with the Brits and focusing on where we could work together. So I hope the president takes that attitude. You're right that Theresa May's got some problems. Her foreign secretary, Boris Johnson, just quit, possibly over Brexit and the difficulties of the UK leaving the European Union. I think that trip will be colored by how things go at NATO. If the president surprises us and pivots to the positive at NATO, I think he could have a good trip in London, and that sets him up for a win with Vladimir Putin. I hope he pivots to the positive.
Right. So that's very interesting. You do forget that President Bush was not popular over there because of the war. We kind of didn't remember it. We remember that President Obama was kind of handed his book on tape to the Queen. That was kind of bizarre. But he was much more popular. And then he heads over to NATO. He gradually became, they really liked him over at NATO, but they were not spending up to their 2% of their GDP, and maybe we were carrying too much of the burden. This president has pushed back strong, and still, David, only 3 nations are spending the 2% necessary, and we're spending like 4%, which is 70% of the revenue, on their defense. Does the president have a point?
Oh, sure he has a point. And American administrations, President Obama, President Bush, President Clinton, were all concerned and pushed the Europeans to spend more. So, sure, President Trump has a point, but let's not forget the other side. Our allies have been with us in the tough fight in Afghanistan for years, and there have been over 1,000 allied, non-U.S., allied troops killed in combat in Afghanistan. They did that after 9/11, after we were attacked. They were there for us. So I'm all for the president pushing the Europeans, especially the Germans, to step up to the plate on defense spending. But it's important that we do so to make the alliance better and not use the spending issue as an excuse to trash the alliance, which has served American interests and American values so well for 70 years.
And you write, too, that when you remember Condoleezza Rice was told by the French leader, hey, enact the Rule 5 agreement, which says if one of us is attacked, we're all attacked. And they did. And they accepted. And they did fight with us. And they have adjusted. They do have a cyber unit now. They do have a quick reaction force, land, air, and sea within 30 days. So things have changed, and they have been there in the past. But I do think was a benefit to the president pushing. My hunch and my belief is that he's going to emphasize more of the positive because so many people expect him to have the same tone as the G7. That's my sense, that it will give him more momentum with Vladimir Putin and it will give him less leverage with Vladimir Putin if it looks like he's already feuding with our friends. Correct?
I think you've nailed it. I hope that you're right. I hope that the president pivots to the positive. He likes to surprise people. He doesn't like to go where people expect him to go. And since so many people expect him to go negative and do what he did at the G7, there's a reasonable chance that he will take credit for NATO doing the right thing, and he deserves some of the credit, and then unite the alliance. Then he goes to see Putin in a much stronger position. So here's hoping, right?
Yeah, Ambassador David Fried is with us. I want you to hear another ambassador. Rick Grinnell said yesterday, he was on with Maria on Fox News Channel, and he was asked about being tough on Russia. And you know the actions against Russia, expelling those diplomats, arming the Ukrainians with lethal weapons. He has pushed back on them and laid out sanctions on them. And Rick Cornell says, don't get lost in the kind words toward Vladimir Putin. Look at the actions. Cut 29.
I see a lot of people here in Germany that are very pleased with the United States sanctions on Russia. We have held the Russians and President Putin accountable for their malign activities. I think people see the facts, and it just makes sense to have a meeting and sit down to talk about issues where the president is going to be defending Americans' national security. But make no mistake about it, we have large sanctions on Russia, and those will continue.
I guess they will continue. So, Ambassador, from what you hope and what you know, when the communique is done at the end, or if the two decide to take questions shoulder to shoulder, which would be great TV. I couldn't wait to see it. What do you expect to emerge out of that? I mean, what do we want? What do we want concrete from Vladimir Putin? Some have pointed to Syria and using their leverage to push Iran back or out.
Well, don't expect too much for the Russians on Syria. Remember that President Obama and Secretary of State Kerry chased after the Russians trying to get a deal on Syria, and they got nothing. So don't keep your hopes up, and above all, don't pay the Russians in advance for doing things that they ought to be doing anyway. President Trump is right. We ought to be working with the Russians where we have common interests. But don't pay the Russians extra for the privilege of working for them. We ought to be straight up, work with them where we can, but push back where we have to. Now, I was concerned when the president said we ought to invite Russia back to the G7. They were kicked out of the G7 because they started a war in Ukraine. They invaded their neighbor. They should have been kicked out. Until they fix that problem, they shouldn't be invited back. I didn't like it when the president said that Crimea belongs to Russia because he says they speak Russian there. Well, they speak English in Canada. That doesn't mean that we both belong to the United Kingdom. We fought a revolution over that issue. So that raised a lot of concerns. I think if President Trump stands up there with Putin and says, this is where we want the Russians to back off. We want them to get out of Ukraine, pull their troops out. We want them to stop interfering in European elections and not do anything in the American elections, just knock it off. We want them to be more helpful in Syria. And we're willing to work with them where we can. Now, that's a pretty good message. President could do it, and then he would be in a position to say to a lot of his media critics that they were wrong and too skeptical. So I'd applaud it, but first he's got to do it. And I, frankly, am still concerned about how it's going to go, given the president's actions and words the last month.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I do have an idea that a lot of these relationships were being taken for granted, not in Poland where you used to work. I sense that they have a real sense of America's virtue. I also think there's something else going on in Europe I want you to talk about, and that is when there was this influx of immigration into Europe and no one knew who was coming in, Germany said, I'll take 1 million plus. And Hungary said, I'm building a fence. And they said, and Hungary everyone said, how could you do that? Well, because look, we want to be Hungarians. We don't know who's coming in. And now Merkel is cracking down on illegal immigration. Poland said, I'm not taking anybody in. You see the problems France is having. They don't even know who is, there's some no-go zones reportedly in some of the areas of France because these people don't even want to be French. And you know that we're having our issues on the border. It's been well chronicled in every news source imaginable. What's going on in the world right now when it comes to nationalism?
Well, you said that the Poles have a good appreciation of America. I have to tell you, I've been talking to some Bulgarians lately who really are pro-American. They are worried about Russian influence. They want to see, they've told me, I've just been talking to a senior Bulgarian pro-American leader who says that he wants more America in Europe, more America in Bulgaria, because that represents our common interests and our common values. So there are a lot of Europeans that are ready to stand with us and do the right thing. Look, these countries in Europe, they want to be proud of their national heritage, and they're right to do so. They want to be able to, especially the ones that overthrew communism a generation ago, they want to be proud to be Bulgarians, to be Poles, and they want control over their borders. I understand that. It's perfectly natural. At the same time, they need to let people who want to become European, who want to join them, join with them. European countries have never been ethnically pure. There are always amalgams of different people that have come and gone in history. So they need to be open enough to let newcomers assimilate, and the newcomers have to want to assimilate.
Right. This new Italian leader also strong on their border, and so is Austria also pushing in that direction. And President Trump was one of the first to speak about that.
Well, President Trump's got a point, although I'll tell you something. Latinos who come to the United States, even illegally, want nothing more than to get jobs, work, and become Americans. All the numbers show that their rates of assimilation into our culture, American culture, are just about identical to the rates of assimilation of Italians and Poles.
Exactly. It's not about, no one's looking to diminish anybody, whether the color of their skin or their background. They just want us to do it the right way. And if people are waiting in line and getting penalized for it, I think that's the only reason. We just want to get a system where we know who's coming in and out. And I think that's where we're going.
Fair enough. And let's remember that we're all, unless you're an American Indian, everybody came from someplace, and we didn't come to America because we were rich. We came usually because we were running from somebody or because we were poor. Do it the right way, absolutely. But let's keep our country strong and open to others with a border that has controls, for sure.
He's Ambassador David Freed. I'll talk to you again. Thanks so much for your time, Ambassador. It's going to be a fascinating week.
Okay. It sure will be. Bye.
You got it. 1-866-408-7669. We're going to 69. So get on board now. I see a lot of calls from across the country here. Brett Baer at the bottom of the hour. You're next. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show.
Giving you everything you need to know. It's Brian Kilmeade.
Hey, we're back, everyone. Of course, the breaking news, Boris Johnson has resigned as Foreign Secretary of Great Britain, leaving Theresa May scrambling again, the second major cabinet member to call it quits because of her policy of Brexit. What a mess. Is President Trump about to show up there? Between that and the World Cup, this is like the third biggest, President Trump's arrival for the first time since president is like the third biggest thing to happen in the country, or third most important. And I wouldn't be surprised if the president brings that up. Mike, listen on KWFS in Wichita Falls, Texas. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Brian. I'm a longtime listener. I was just going to make a comment about I've known so many people that became citizens from Mexico. My father-in-law, people that I see every day. I'm an inspector for the city, and these construction guys. The majority of them are Mexicans that have come to the country either legally or illegally, one or the other. But at the same time, most of them, it takes them years to become citizens, even if they do it the right way. And my father-in-law was the same way, and there's no reason for that. I mean, the federal government, the people that are responsible for going through and I guess you call it vetting these people, that's just ridiculous. When
the whole process is screwed up.
The process is just crazy. And I was in the military 23 years, so I know the wheels of the federal government turn slow is always the thing. But it's just that's totally ridiculous, and that's why you got so many people coming and just give up on the process. I mean,
well, I mean, but the people that do go through the process, they pay the money. They answer the questions. They make sure they're crime-free and always have a job. And they look around and they say, wait a second, these people just snuck right in. They're living their life. They circumvented the process. Now what we got to do is get past the border issues and the illegals here and then get to the other stuff, which we all agree on. They said there's only 20% of immigration reform that Democrats and Republicans disagree on. And all we do is focus on that 20.
they never seem to aim at the problem, though, of I've got a nephew who was a Border Patrol agent, you know, and as soon as we had 9/11 and everybody jumped over on the other side, and now he flies in an airplane as a what do you call it, the air marshal.
Well, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. You understand what it's like on the ground in Texas. Brett Baer next.
Talk show that's real. This is the Brian Kilmeade Show.
The president's outsourced this decision to the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation. It is extraordinary. I was a law clerk to Justice Blackmun. I've argued cases before the Supreme Court for them. I've never seen a president of the United States, in effect, make himself a puppet of outside groups and choose from a group of right-wing fringe ideologues.
Okay, that's one way to view it. Or you could say that he went to experts in a field that he's not an expert in, the Federalist Organization, who he put together a list of 20. They went to 25, and now he's down to 4. Senator Blumenthal will constantly go after President Trump, so get used to it. Joining us now is Brett Baer. We'll be watching the show tonight. Brett, are you going to be part of the coverage tonight at 9?
I don't know yet. I think so. I'll be out at the Supreme Court for special report, and then we'll have special coverage after that, obviously. We're going to see how it all lines up with the actual announcement, but it should be interesting. And to hear Senator Blumenthal talk, I mean, does he not believe that Democratic presidents have outreach to experts and people in the know in legal circles when making a choice for the Supreme Court? Because they have.
Right. And Leonard Leo left the Federalist to work temporarily, took a leave to help the president through this process. It gave him Gorsuch in the long run. I have no problem with that. Do you have a Secretary of State to deal with foreign policy issues? These are expertise in that area. And do you look into other people in, the Council of Foreign Policy for issues like that? So that pretty much is a political statement. For the most part, we're down to 4. And the 4 are pretty well known at this point. You have Brett Kavanaugh, you have Ray Kethledge, you have Thomas Hardiman, and Amy Coney Barrett. When I left work on Friday, I felt as though people were starting to push towards Kethledge. Do you sense somebody else's stock is rising from over the weekend?
Well, I think Kethledge and Hardiman actually were rising, in part because of the easier approval process. They don't have a long paper trail, and it seemed to be that Senator McConnell was suggesting that those two would be easier to get through. Now, for all of the pushback and negativity that Brett Kavanaugh had, I don't think that he's out of the running yet, and I think that's the whole thing is just up to President Trump, really, and how he feels. I do think that Barrett has a bit of an uphill climb when it comes to the issue of abortion, simply because they think it would be a lot tougher on her past writings and stances on that.
Yeah, John Malcolm weighed in, an expert in this area, over the weekend with Maria, Cut 12.
The calculus changes with each pick, and it's a whole new ball game. Tom Hardiman has actually been a judge the longest. He was a district court judge in 2003, and he sat on the Third Circuit since 2006. A very distinguished judge, close, of course, to the president's sister, has written some very solid opinions on religious liberty, the Second Amendment. So it doesn't surprise me that he's in that final list. Whether he'll get the nod or not remains to be seen.
And some say the more you're right, the more trouble you could get, right?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the more paper trail you have, the more opportunity the opposition has to go down some rabbit hole into a discussion that potentially trips a nominee up. And that's basically what the opposition has, is the ability to trip a candidate up or somehow convince the moderate Republicans like Susan Collins and you have a few others that potentially are on the fence that they need to vote against this person. I think it's a tall order, and I do think that the picks probably are going to get the votes they need.
Brett, I'm going to pay you extra. We have a lot to cover. Boris Johnson has just resigned as foreign minister under Theresa May. Not that we in America really digest the parliamentary system, but the second major big resignation as the president gets set to go over there. How much trouble is she in right now?
I think she's in big trouble. I think that there are a couple of high-profile resignations, this being the latest, and that's the biggest, and how she's handling the Brexit rollout and or not handling it. And you heard the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador, Woody Johnson, say that because of how it's being handled, it impedes or threatens the U.S.-UK free trade possibilities. Well, that is just days ahead of the president arriving there for talks. That's not a good thing.
And the president wants a positive trade story. That would have been the easiest, because Britain, who's had some friction with this president, would have embraced it. It would show the people of Britain that just because we left the union, it doesn't mean we're not going to have some great trade deals. It would have been a positive for the president. So it looks like it's the third biggest story. Theresa May, the World Cup Final Four, and then Donald Trump arriving. The president of the United States' first visit. It's the third biggest story in Britain.
I know, it's amazing. And, you've got that London mayor who is really intent on causing some problems, it seems like, for the president. He's spoken out about them a number of times, now has authorized this blimp or whatever it is flying over London of a giant Donald Trump baby. And it's going to be a scene. It's going to be a total scene. But you're right, it's the third story there.
Now, next, I want to bring you to Danielle Pletka on Meet the Press yesterday. She is not always with the president or against the president, but when it comes to North Korea and the way Mike Pompeo was treated over the weekend, to a long dinner that accomplished nothing, to a bungalow instead of a hotel, to being mocked. He didn't sleep well the night before and mocking about fake news and really getting nothing done in 30 hours. Here's what she said, cut 14.
The president came into office campaigning on the fact that the Obama administration signed an Iran deal that was the worst deal ever done. It was flawed. The Iranians were cheating. The president pulled out of that deal this year, and now he is talking the way that Barack Obama did, even more liberally, I would say, about North Korea, without any facts to back him up. The problem here is very straightforward. The president says denuclearize, and he means one thing, and Kim Jong-un says denuclearize, and he means another thing.
So we're in a tough spot in this negotiation. The president tweeted out he still expects Kim Jong-un to do what he said he was going to do. Where are we at here?
Not in a good place. Whenever you're trusting the North Koreans in their history of negotiating, it's not exactly the best position to be in, because they don't have a great history of it. And frankly, you don't know what you don't know until you get on the ground. And I think the treatment of Secretary Pompeo goes to show you a long way. Now, there are some people who are speculating, including Lindsey Graham, that China had some influence on North Korea's treatment of Pompeo, possibly tied to the trade deal, possibly tied to other things. And the president picked up on that in his tweet. I think this may be the dance that North Korea does, but it's not a positive one, and it sure doesn't seem like it's heading where Singapore left off.
Right, and you could actually say to the president, listen, I took the guy at his word. I tried to give him a break. He didn't do it, so we're going to go back to the way it was, and that could be part of the conversation that they have when Vladimir Putin and he meet, but not that that's really a relationship built on trust either. The NATO summit, I'm a betting guy. If I was to put my money, I have a big gambling issue personally, but maybe I'm telling you too much. But if I was a betting guy, Brett, I would be pushing for the president to come out and look more at the positive of NATO and less the negative, because everyone's expecting something different. What are your sources telling you?
Yeah, I think that that's true. I think that they're considering basing some troops in Poland. That's a real problem for Russia. I think there may be, a counter narrative that just doesn't fit how he's been tweeting and talking, and I think you're right. I don't think that, going back to North Korea, that and how that's going bodes well for the lead into Helsinki. I'll be in Helsinki for a special show on Sunday and then live on Monday with special report. But there's a lot of inside foreign policy circles in Washington, a lot of nervousness about what exactly we are going to get out of Helsinki.
Right. And do you feel as though anybody knows? And how do you feel as though the one-on-one without interpreters is going to work? Because I'm not sure Putin speaks English.
I think he speaks a little English. I think he chooses not to. But I don't know how it's going to work. I mean, that is how this president operates, is in personality. It has spurred on some amazing stories and some writing that goes to the nth degree of the Russia collusion, allegations. Some of these writers are going, not that two leaders are meeting, but that a Russian is meeting with his patsy, essentially. And it's really something to see. And it shows you how this story has evolved. We don't know the end of these investigations yet, but some people have written it all already done.
The whole pushback on the Mueller probe has worked. We know the popularity with Robert Mueller in particular, and the ongoing investigation has gone negative. And I think the president's push to bring this to an end is working through his surrogates. But there's so much has yet to play out. The other thing we're not talking about, but I just want to touch on it with you, is trade. We know that the president has had tariffs on Mexico, Canada, China, and the European Union. And even though many of those same nations are going to be in NATO and they'd be up for a discussion, right away there's a lot of people nervous in the Farm Belt, in Iowa especially. Senator Joni Ernst weighed in on Face the Nation, Cut 31.
The tariffs that have been imposed and the retaliation stemming from that puts us in a very vulnerable position as our markets go down. So I would just encourage the president. Of course, we want great deals, and I know he'll be able to negotiate those, but we would like to see a number of these trade agreements wrapped up in short order.
They get nervous. A lot of people are. I think the president's done a bad job communicating his goals and plowing the ground, pun intended, to let people know in short-term loss will be long-term gain. And we're just going to wait and see mode.
Sometimes tweets don't cut it. He uses them to his printing press, but sometimes they don't cut it. Sometimes you got to give a policy speech, from the Oval Office or somewhere on a farm. Here's what we have to do. Here's exactly what I'm thinking. Yes, will there be some short-term pain? How long is it going to last? Here's what I think, and here's the ultimate goal, because we've been on the back end of trade deals for X number of years with these number of countries, and eventually, we're going to get the better deal. I mean, that's his pitch, but he doesn't make it directly in a policy speech. He does it via tweet oftentimes, or a side remark. And it does take some instructing, especially if you're a farmer looking at those numbers going upside down.
And President Trump has proven somewhat of a trailblazer when it comes to cracking down on immigration and national pride. If you see some of the elections in Italy, you see the acquiescence of Angela Merkel and her border policy when it comes to illegals coming into, or immigrants coming into her country, 1.4 million, and created chaos in many respects. So she had to compromise there. Austria and Hungary, same thing. Poland never let any of these flood of immigrants get into their country. So what President Trump has been saying, we're a nation, if we don't have borders, we're not a nation, a lot of that is really taking root in Europe, wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah, it's definitely a message that has resonated, and people, have a different take on it over there. But there is an understanding of what he's trying to communicate here. I think more of the problem was in the rollout of some of these things, in the rollout of the initial travel ban, in the rollout of the zero tolerance plan. It caused a lot of problems in just simply the process.
Absolutely.
And it was a kind of a nightmare. And they're still cleaning up from that. I think they can, but it's going to take some work.
Yeah, I mean, with all the real issues that you cannot prevent, a lot of these self-inflicted wounds have done the most damage. And as much as you want to blame President Trump for everything, you do have to count on people to implement programs effectively on their own. So the travel ban was a travesty to start with. It ends up getting ultimately okayed in a third version.
3.0, yeah.
Yeah, 3.0. And now we know the whole separating families was a disaster. The way it was done, we understand he wanted to create a deterrent, but the execution didn't work. And they obviously didn't do the paperwork necessary to find out how to quickly reunify those families. So that's creating an additional headache. I don't really think you can blame him. I think that, ultimately he's responsible, but you do know in the big picture, some people have to do their job effectively. They never had it for 2 years, and they should be more accustomed to executing it effectively.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this administration moves on rapid fire. I mean, it's always doing the next thing, and it's kind of lurching from policy to policy. But at some point, there has to be somebody that says, wait, if you do this, X, Y, Z happens. And sometimes I don't think that happens.
We're going to watch you tonight at 6. We know that's going to happen, Brett, and we're going to see you. I'm going to watch your coverage Sunday night in Helsinki and then over on Monday again. Brett Baer, thanks so much.
We'll see you, Brett.
You got it. 1-866-408-7669. When we come back, we're going to open up the phones and close out the show with what's on your mind. After all, you've been listening enough. You have a lot of opinions. Let the world know what you think.
Getting past all the rhetoric, it's Brian Kilmeade.
Nobody that President Trump could nominate from a conservative event that will get many Democratic votes. But this is a nightmare for red state Democrats to oppose a highly qualified nominee. And all four of these people are highly qualified, been on the court, know what they're doing, mainstream judges. So red state Democrats are going to have a very hard decision.
That is Senator Lindsey Graham yesterday saying, good luck voting against this, a lawyer on the Judiciary Committee, especially these the John Testers of the world, the Joe Donnellys of the world, the Heidi Heitkamps of the world, the Senator McCaskills. How are you going to, and the Joe Manchin, how do you vote against somebody if their record checks out like it has so far? Ruth is listening on WVGA in Valdosta, Georgia. Hey, Ruth.
Hi.
What's on your mind?
What I have to say is I was just hearing you being critical, and some of the people you were talking to, being critical about our president, the way he says things or the way he handles things. And he is a businessman, for goodness sake. His critics all of you are so used to people being political and just tiptoeing around. And he's a strong businessman.
Ruth, I like the policy. If you're going to do the trade war, you have to communicate it to the people who make electronics, who make steel, who farm for a living. You don't think he could be more effective in communicating? All right, thanks for the call.
I don't know
I'm going to have to move on. Steve, listen to WHIO in Dayton, Ohio. Hey, Steve.
How you doing, Brian?
What's on your mind?
This has always bothered me since I heard about it. First of all, I'd like to know who leads the Republican Party in this country. It seems to me there's a lack of leadership at the very top. When you see that and what I've heard is, and I believe it, the Democrats have about 2,000 different offices set up throughout the country. They have a game plan. They have these staffs with these people who are on the dole.
Steve, you're right, and I know the frustration on the Republican side. They don't protest, but you know what they keep doing? They keep winning, and the Democrats keep resisting, and they get angrier, but they don't make any gains.